I'm Sneha, and I'm the host of Mind Matters podcast. Mind Matters is an attempt to create a space to have conversations on mental health and raise awareness on all facets of mental health. We do this by sharing stories and perspectives of individuals from all around the world.
And I'm Jordan LoMonaco. I'm one of the co-hosts for Imperfect Eco-Hero Podcast. Imperfect Eco-Hero is a platform and podcast series that uses storytelling as a way to connect with and celebrate the global community of people tackling this climate crisis, all while striving to dismantle the notion of perfectionism in activism.
We'll be your co moderators today for this panel. As some of you might not be aware, May is Mental Health Awareness Month. And just like how Jordan and I first met, today's panel discussion will be an open conversation on the intersections between mental health and the climate crisis. Jordan?
Yeah, as you can see, today's exciting panel will be between 9 amazing wave makers across 5 countries and 6 time zones. So it is more important than ever to take a moment before we start to acknowledge and reflect on the lands which we all reside. Land acknowledgements recognize that the land is an expression of gratitude and appreciation to those whose territory you reside on, as well as honor the indigenous peoples who have been living and working on this land for thousands of years. I encourage everyone to reflect on the long-standing history that has brought you to reside on the land that you do and seek to understand your place within that history, especially since colonialism is a current ongoing process and we need to build our mindfulness of our present participation in it, which is why I would like to acknowledge the sacred land in which I currently live, work, and am recording this panel discussion from. This land is the territory of the Huron-Wendat and Petun First Nations, the Seneca, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit River. The territory was the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy and the Ojibwe and allied nations to peacefully share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. And although it is important to acknowledge the land, it is only just the first step. We are all treaty signers and thus have a responsibility and accountability for the violence that Indigenous peoples have and currently still face, especially when it comes to their fight for human rights, social justice, and climate justice. Our allyship is an ongoing and continuous process of showing up, learning and unlearning, and acting in solidarity with these communities.
So, who are these wonderful human beings joining us today? From across the globe, uh, we're here to share our personal stories and ideas and perspectives. Joining us from the nonprofit organization Start the Wave, we have Dominique Provost-Chalkley, the founder, Randi Ramdeen, the project coordinator, and Don, aka D2, the graphic arts and social media manager. We're also joined by lead climate psychology scholar and psychotherapist Dr. Caroline Hickman, mental health advocate and executive director of the Good Grief Network, Sarah JS, founder of Mental Matters and the Mental Health Innovation Network, Lerato Phalatse, and our wonderful ASL interpreter, Shelley. Before we get into this discussion, we want to issue a trigger and content warning. We will be talking about sensitive topics like depression, anxiety, and more. If any of these discussions are triggering for you or bring up any negative feelings, please take care. If you still want to watch it now, please do so with a friend or someone you trust around. If this isn't immediately available, please wait till you find yourself in the right headspace and with the right tools and environment accessible to get into such a discussion. Thank you and take care.
To kick off our panel today, we figured the best person to take the lead on breaking down the psychological barriers to climate change and creating a safe space for all of us to reflect on our own experiences and emotions was Dr. Caroline Hickman. Dr. Hickman is a UK-based lecturer at the University of Bath in social work and climate psychology. She's a practicing psychotherapist and board member of the Climate Psychology Alliance. Dr. Hickman works with schools, parent groups, youth activist groups, and as a psychotherapist with children, young people, and adults, all dealing with eco-anxiety and distress about the climate and biodiversity crisis. Her work aims to uncover and explore different stories, narratives, and images around our defenses against the difficult truth about climate change that we are facing. Thank you again, Dr. Hickman, for taking the time to join us today. The floor is all yours.
Thank you so much. And it's an enormous honor to be invited just to give a very short introduction. The reason I offered to do this is because, as you just said, we're talking about painful things, and it helps give us a container. In psychotherapy, we just need to be held in order to explore and talk about uncomfortable things. So that's what I'm trying to offer here, is a space. I'm certainly not presenting myself as the expert on this, but just sharing some things that I think might be helpful. And I'm smiling because my dog is joining in already. So I'll introduce him properly in a moment. Before I do that, I loved your introduction. Before I introduce Murphy, who's joining in, let's just think of this as nature and biodiversity coming into the call here. Before I do that, I want to start with a quote. So I think your introduction was very beautiful, but I also want to introduce children's voices into this because my research is with children globally. And I want to use the voices of the children in the Maldives, one of whom said to me, he said, we saw online that people had a funeral for a glacier in Iceland, and this was a beautiful ritual, that people in Iceland saw this glacier that was dying and they had this funeral. He said, but our island is going to be underwater soon. Who's going to have a funeral for us? So I just want to dedicate this to the grief and the sadness and the innovation and the heart and the soul of children globally who are feeling their way into this crisis with us. And we're all adults on the panel. So I really just want to make sure that we get children's voices included. And I can do that best as a researcher and a psychotherapist by bringing in those voices of those children. Another child said, climate change is like Thanos in the Avengers Endgame. And the ideology of Thanos was to kill off half the population of the world so the other half can thrive. He said, but we're the half being killed off. So children are embodying a lot of this pain and this grief, I think, on behalf of the rest of us. So that's where I want to start. And just very quickly, I promise I don't want to talk for very long, to talk about how climate psychology can give us a framework, a holding framework to explore catastrophe and also transformational energy and existential grief and hope and despair in this space that we're all moving into. So this is a journey through anxiety and grief to awareness and community and compassion and heart and collective understanding. And this is the noisy one in the background. This is Murphy, who is my much loved 13-year-old Labradoodle. And I live in a very small house. And so if I shut him in the kitchen, he'll think he's done something really wrong. So you just have to live with the noises in the background, I'm afraid. He'll go back to sleep in a moment. He's now part of every conversation I have. And I hope you don't mind this. So the Climate Psychology Alliance talks about the importance of facing difficult truths, about being able to stand in these difficult places, these difficult paths that we're embodying at the moment, both individually, personally, internally, collectively in our communities and in the planet. And it's about developing this understanding across the planet about what we're facing and how difficult and painful this is. And this is what climate psychology brings to the conversation. I'm so sorry about the noise. I'm always grateful for Gus Speth, who was the US advisor on climate change. And he was a scientist. He said, I used to think top environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. And with 30 years good science, we could deal with those problems. He said, but I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with those, we need a spiritual and a cultural transformation. And science doesn't know how to do that. Just to put this into context, of course, we've got the problems of COVID globally. And the way we're dealing with COVID globally is unequal. And we can see very much, and I want to just, express my compassion, my concern, and my sympathy and my grief for the people of India, especially at the moment, and other parts of the planet that are really struggling with this. We are struggling on a planetary basis, but some are struggling more than others. And what it does is it embodies that injustice and that unfairness, which we are seeing in the climate change and biodiversity collapse. I would really place the COVID crisis in the biodiversity collapse. And I think it's really important sitting here tonight in the UK that I say sorry, and we need to recognize this. And we need to extend our compassion and our understanding and action. Paul Hoggart, I think, framed this perfectly within the Climate Psychology Alliance. He said, we're living in this time when a tragedy which is without precedent is unfolding in front of our eyes. We're living in this and it's unfolding. So it's changing constantly. If we were to make the mistake of thinking we understand what's going on, we would be very wrong. So psychologically, we have to accept that we don't understand fully what's happening emotionally, but we also have to step into this and take action. We're witnessing these catastrophic rates of species extinction, biodiversity loss, soil and ocean exhaustion, and runaway climate change. So we are living in this. We have to find a way to live in this. And if we were to just use a psychological framework that only looked at the conscious mind, it would be a bit of a mistake. We've got to understand that we can often be 90%, 95% unconscious creatures. We're not rational creatures. Humans are not rational. If we were rational, there would be no war, there would be no poverty. So we're not completely rational creatures. We have unconscious process. And this is where climate psychology is a depth psychology that includes this unconscious process. We have to look under the surface. We can't just have rational solutions. So what's the range and breadth of emotion that people are feeling that I basically want to say tonight? These are emotionally healthy responses. All of these are healthy responses. We want this emotional biodiversity of anxiety, grief and nostalgia, hope and hopelessness, anger, blame, frustration, guilt. We need to sometimes have fantasies of rescue. We need apocalyptic fantasies. To extend into those fantasies is psychologically healthy. We need to be able to tolerate our desire for avoidance and sometimes go to nihilism and despair. These are all healthy. This is the emotional climate that we have to navigate. If we go to a positivist psychology framework that says we have to get rid of these feelings, then we're cutting off part of ourselves, we're cutting off part of our body, we're cutting off part of our soul. In the same way as saying we shouldn't feel anxiety or grief, it would be like saying we can live without polar bears, we can live without giraffes. No, we need to actually have this biodiversity emotionally, as well as on a planetary basis. I've got the statistics. We are very bad at the moment about collecting statistics globally. But if we just look at the statistics of what's happening in the UK, then Friends of the Earth YouGov poll last year found 70% of 18 to 24-year-olds were more worried than the year before. And these are the statistics during COVID. So what we can definitely see is that, particularly in younger populations, anxiety about climate change is increasing despite COVID, despite the threats of COVID. So this eco-anxiety is this awful anxiety that we're living with, that we are witnessing these things, but really with younger people in particular, it's the failure of adults to act. It's the failure of adults to take action, which would reduce the anxiety for people. So why is this mentally healthy? Well, we measure mental health by looking at our capacity to respond to external reality. So I would worry about people that didn't feel anxiety and didn't feel grief and didn't feel worried about these things. It's a mentally healthy response. So I mentioned solastalgia and eco-grief a moment ago. So we may feel anxiety initially when we become aware of the climate crisis, but what that frequently then develops into is a grief. And solastalgia is a particular grief around the loss of place in relation to the planet that we love. It's a grief in relation to the environment, and it's our lived home that we can feel. And sometimes this grief can feel disenfranchised or disallowed or interrupted. Like we shouldn't feel the grief for the loss of the planet, for the loss of the earth, for the loss of the plants, but we need to. That's part of what we need to do to heal. So you might be thinking, okay, but these feelings are painful. Well, this is the process of change that I'm talking about. As we go through anxiety into threat and guilt and depression, what moves us from the depression and the hopelessness is grief. Depression, through feeling grief, that moves us into a radical acceptance, a radical hope that we can start to do something and take action and then move forwards. And what that gives us is a sustainable action as we move forwards. And this transforms our anxiety into eco-understanding, eco-empathy, eco-compassion, eco-courage, eco-community awareness, connection, belonging, meaning, care, and aliveness. Because fundamentally, the truth is, living fully in the world means also feeling this awful anxiety that goes with the territory of being a vulnerable human being. So that's my introduction to this. Hopefully that frames it for us in a way that we can now go from there into this more complex discussion. And I'm going to put myself on mute and go and let the dog out into the garden for a moment and be back. Talk without me for a moment.
Wow. Even though I've heard this before, my mind gets blown, and definitely makes me so
I was
introspective
thinking the exact same
of
thing.
my own mental health journey. So I would love to open it up to the floor to hear how everyone else is feeling about their own relationship and journey with mental health, what that has been like, and what those conversations around mental health have been like in your own community, your family. Anyone who feels called to answer can totally take the floor.
I can talk if someone else. Yeah. Okay. My journey with mental health has been a complicated one, because I knew when I was very young that I would benefit from mental health support as an ACE, so a child of adverse childhood experiences, especially around being a person of color. So I knew that I would need support very, very early, but I was told that any issues or problems one has can be solved on their own. And so I actually struggled with that idea for a very long time, and thought that, there was something wrong with me, that I couldn't figure out how to solve my own problems. And it wasn't until I started dating someone who was taking psychology, and they kind of suggested I take a psychology course because I would probably benefit from it and really enjoy it. And I started learning more about how therapy and psychotherapy really helps you advance and move through any pain and suffering and whatnot that you've experienced in life. And so I realized how beneficial it was, to the point where I'm now just a big supporter of mental health support and mental health and getting help for mental health as soon as you feel it necessary. And I've taken that journey. I've taken that step a couple times in my life that I was very afraid to take. And I remember walking into a psychotherapist office for the first time, and I just started crying because it was reaching out for that help for the first time. And it's really scary. It's really scary to be vulnerable. But I recommend it to everyone, because why wait around and suffer when you can get the support that you need? Thanks, Randi.
Lerato, would you be open to sharing your journey?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I just wanted to, raise my hand up reaction or thingy, but I couldn't find it. Sure. My mental health journey. I was diagnosed with depression and anxiety in my teens, and it was a difficult one because, number one, in my community as a Black person in South Africa, mental health is still a very much taboo topic. So you can imagine now my parents have to deal with a child who's got mental health problems, and when you mention depression, they're like, what issues do you have as a teenager? What stress what stresses do teenagers have? So what's your problem? I mean, so it was left untreated, number one, because of the stigma that's still surrounded or stuck to the mental health issues in our community. And number two, because accessing mental health care services is still a struggle where I am from. You know, if you do not have medical insurance, then tough luck, you know. So navigating the government systems in terms of mental health care is really still a struggle, especially for those who are from the marginalized communities. And sure, in between, let me see, my teens and getting help for myself in my late 20s, I had attempted suicide 4 times. And I believe that part of that obviously was because of my diagnosis not being treated for such a long time. I mean, yeah, it was just escalating. And I think it was only my last attempt of suicide that I decided that I was going to get help. You know, I was like, no, look, I'm still here, I'm alive. I tried to take my life away, you know, so many times, and that did not work. So surely, as an adult, I was now much older, and I decided that, okay, I can take action. You know, I've got some funds available to start getting the help that I need. But it wasn't an instant decision that I made for myself. I mean, when I got admitted at the hospital, the doctor said, we're not going to admit you here. We think you need to go into a psychiatric facility. I was desperate. I was really desperate for any kind of help. And without a doubt, I was like, yeah, no, whatever it takes for me to get better, because I had been stuck in this place that nobody knew. It was just myself and just this place. I was exploding. And I was admitted into a psychiatric facility. I was there for some time, almost, a month. And for the first time in my life, I actually got introduced to psychotherapy. I had a little understanding of what mental health is. You know, I mean, it's something that I would hear of, but what it really entails. And I think also that in my communities, a lot of people's experiences get invalidated. So that was also an issue for me. So when I got into the psychiatric facility, that was something that it was the opposite of that. I could talk about my experiences. Somebody was listening, you know, people understood where I was coming from. And that is when I decided that there could be somebody else who has gone through my journey or who is going through a similar thing. And I decided to just use my voice and my story. And I just wanted to share my journey. And that is how I just got passionate about mental health. And I always say that it's so hard to actually just define mental health. I mean, what Dr. Caroline just showed us, I was just blown away. Like, okay, this is the first time I'm hearing of this. Like, what's going on? I mean, this is amazing. And it's so comforting to know that, you know, we experience mental health in different ways. And I think that it's so important to validate everyone's experiences. And for me, it was just also mental health, where people, when you mention mental health, it sounds like a really far-fetched thing. And I just wanted to bring it down to everyday experience that, look, this is me. Sometimes I wake up and I really just don't want to go to work. Sometimes I wish I can just call and just say, look, I'm not feeling good. You know, so those are just, I mean, the fact that I decided to get help and I'm now taking medication and I'm going through therapy doesn't mean that I'm instantly okay. And that's another thing that I'm trying to communicate to people, that it's a journey and everyone's journey is different. What could take 6 months for you will probably take, 3 years for somebody else. And other people will have to deal with this for the rest of their lives. So the biggest thing for me is I don't want people to feel like their experiences are invalidated. I want people to know that we all experience it in different ways, and yeah, that's a little bit about my journey. And I am learning about mental health every day. So I'm very happy to be part of this discussion, because it will also just, it's good to learn what it looks like from everyone's perspective, from different regions or areas of the world, parts of the world. So yeah, that's me.
Thank you, Lerato.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Uh,
sharing.
I just wanted to add one thing. You mentioned invalidated experiences, and this is just something I personally feel, that just the fact that you're opening up now, you're taking a step at breaking that cycle, because anyone that has gone through something similar right now, just listening to what you said, their experience has just been validated for them, and you're taking a step at breaking that cycle. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Mhm.
I wanted to jump in really quickly and share my experience because it's so different, and just to really share the spectrum of experiences with mental health. I come from a Jewish family in New York where psychotherapy is completely normalized. If you're not in psychotherapy, that's the strange thing. I've been in therapy longer than I haven't in my life. And, I started therapy when I was 16, and not because something was wrong, but because my family saw it as the same as going to the gym. You work out your body and you work out your mind. And so everyone I knew was in therapy. I was one of the youngest people I knew, but my parents were each in individual therapy. My parents were in couples therapy. And so it was really normalized for me. And so I had this experience of normalizing mental health and talking about it. And I had parents who were really attentive in kind of doing the in-between work between therapy, just kind of checking in with me about my emotions. And that was completely normalized in my family. But it's interesting because despite mental health and care for our minds being normalized in my own family, the thing I was really missing was a climate aware psychologist, someone who didn't diminish my experience of fear and anxiety as a teenager, as someone in my 20s, because I'm too young to be concerned with the state of the world. Like, I should have a childhood, I should have dreams. And so there was this sense of the mainstream psychology world kind of diminishing the amount of fear I could feel as a young person, as a young adult, about climate crisis. And in my own family, I felt like I was screaming climate collapse and crisis for a very long time before any of these terms were normalized. And so I think it's really interesting because my journey started out as really confident in my mental health journey and what it meant to have mental health resources accessible to me, but I still felt this lack. I still felt like I was alone on an island and no one was talking about the real thing, which is this existential crisis that we're going through as a society. And now in my mental health journey, I've been in therapy for 20 years, and now I'm finding that talk therapy has less of a place in my life. Now I'm finding there's other practices like somatic therapy and moving into my body and starting to do therapy that kind of bypasses some of my thinking, because I can overthink everything. But I'm finding now that there are these other practices, more body-based practices, that really help me with my talk therapy. And so I'm moving into more somatics, and I'm finding that my mental health journey has really gone from being really heady into being really embodied. And it's such an interesting place for me because I love to talk, but there are some things that my talking is not helping me untangle within me. And it's almost like I need to bypass my mind at times to be able to really deal with the trauma of living in a destructive culture, because all of that is, I think, living within my body. There are times where I'm deep in a breathing practice and the tears come, and it's not because I was thinking about something. Something was unearthed during that practice. And so I think it's interesting that mental health, we call it mental, but it's really the full body that's experiencing all of these traumas of living through a destructive culture. Thanks for hearing me.
Well, that was really good. Thanks for sharing, Sarah.
I can jump in really quick and share because my perspective is a little different as well, approaching it from how the stigma and the journey changed from my childhood to like me being a parent. Because I remember as a kid, my mom went to therapy, and it was mainly just saying, hey, I'm going to go to therapy to work out some stuff. And I was like, okay. And that was it. That was the conversation. And I was still very much living in the stigma of that's bad. Like, you don't talk about that. You don't want anyone to know that you are going to therapy. And so like, I never said anything to anyone. And it was literally just that one conversation. Like, I have no idea how many times she went, how long she went. I just know after a certain amount of time, she got happier and like, you know, everything was fine. And so, you know, we moved on from it. And I recently started going to therapy over the last year. And it's interesting because I never talked to my son, who's now 12, about therapy. And when I went to him to say the same thing, like, hey, you know, I'm going to start going to therapy. Like, his dad also started going to therapy. And I was like, we're doing this. Like, he kind of snickered and he was like, you're going to therapy? And I was like, where did that even come from? Because I've not had conversations with this about like, where are you getting this stigma? Like, is it that inbred into our society that my 12-year-old has a stigma about mental health that I have not even had a conversation with him? And in that moment, I was like, this is getting nipped in the bud right now. And so like, we had a whole conversation about how like, there's nothing bad with going to therapy. It's actually really good. And it shows someone's strength. And like, it takes a lot to reach out for help. And, you know, we had a whole conversation about it. And every time I went to an appointment, I would be like, I'm going to a therapy appointment today. And he'd be like, okay. And when I get home, I would talk to him about it. You know, I went as far as like posting it on my social media. Like, so it was even reaching beyond him and just like showing that it's normal. And so that's kind of my, I think, biggest standout point for me was kind of taking how that was approached when I was a child and making sure that it was approached in a different way for him. And like, I've seen his attitude completely change. And we've had conversations like, you ever feel the need that you want to talk to someone that is not someone you know, like me or dad or anybody else, like, you tell me immediately, because we are very blessed and very privileged. Like, I work for an amazing company who gives everybody in my family 6 appointments for free every single year. And so I can literally just pick up the phone and get him into an appointment if he really needed it. And so we've been very clear, and we do check-ins, and, you know, just to make sure, especially like, you know, with COVID and we're just stuck inside, like I definitely worry about that. And so, I think that's my biggest transition with mental health, is like really advocating and changing that stigma for like the next generation. So hopefully they don't grow up the same way we do, where we felt like we couldn't ask for help if we needed it.
It's amazing, D2.
Thank you, D2.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful. Do we have time for me to quickly jump in?
Yeah,
Jordan?
go for it.
Firstly, I want to say thank you to Caroline for that amazing presentation. I too was just like, my mind was blown. And it's so exciting and reassuring for me. I was born in Bristol. Caroline, are you in Bath?
No, I'm out in Wiltshire, so same distance from Bath and Bristol. So
right.
I know Bristol well. Yeah.
So I was born and bred in Bristol until about the age of 16. And in regards to my mental health journey, I had 0 conversations around mental health at all. When growing up, I didn't even know that it was a thing, honestly. And it was only when I moved over to Canada that I started having conversations around mental health with a castmate, Melanie from Winona. And I just suddenly felt like, oh, this is something that you struggle with too. Like, this is a lot more normalized in the conversations we were having. It was a lot more normalized, which was really relieving, and helped me deepen sort of my understanding of mental health, and therefore take the steps necessary to untangle some of my stuck energy, as you say, Sarah, that's in the body. I very much relate to that too. But you know, in regards to climate change, my father was really at the forefront of those conversations around climate change. And so I was hearing about the horrors of what was happening in the world, I think very young. And certainly I wasn't having any conversations outside of the home with anyone. So it very much felt like my dad was like, Dom, like, this is a real thing, and was like quite like he was processing it himself and he was sharing it with me. And my reaction was just helplessness. Like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with all of this information, and I don't know how to not be emotionally affected by this. And what I think it actually, I think probably is a coping mechanism in a way. I think I like almost, what's that term when you like detach yourself from it and you're able to like put it in a little box, like
Compartmentalize,
exactly. Compartmentalize it and just kind of power on. And in a way it was like the reverse of like, yeah, I can't remember who said it now, but almost like I need to have that childhood. I think it was you, Sarah. Like you were having the, hello, is everyone waking up here? Like, we need to wake up. There's all of this going on right now and we need to listen. Whereas I was like bombarded with that and felt like a little child, not knowing how to be a child and not knowing how to dream and what my dreams were. And should I really be concentrating on this in order to it clearly needs to be something that I'm thinking about. So feeling a bit overwhelmed in all of that. So when I came to Canada and started really untangling some of that, I realized how much of an effect that had. And so it's so reassuring, Caroline, to hear you talking about eco-anxiety in a way that we can all really understand and therefore work with more efficiently. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing, Dom. You've actually given us the perfect segue. We'd love to discuss a little bit more about how all of your experiences have been with like climate change, and when did the climate crisis really hit home for you with your mental health journey and just in general, like with your life?
Before we do that, can I be annoying and just interrupt?
Go for it.
Because I just want to respond to what I've been listening to. So I want to come to the questions in a second, but before that, I just really want to say how moving it is to listen to all your stories. And so I've been sort of sitting here listening to you, thinking how wonderful it is for me as well to hear your stories, right? And what that does is it makes me feel part of something as well. And I could see the reactions from everybody as each woman, we're all women here, were telling their stories, and everyone was going, yes, keep talking, and like cheering each other on and relating and empathizing. And yeah, there was that lovely sense of sharing something. So we may have considerable difference and diversity between us, but there's also something really shared, which is just really comforting and soothing. And, you know, it's the importance of conversations, the importance, what human beings want is to be understood. We want to be understood. We want to feel that we're not isolated, that we're not alone. And that one of the best definitions of mental illness I ever heard was not being able to find anybody who could tolerate being with you. So I think that's part of what you're approaching here tonight, is finding ways to understand each other and talk about mental health in different ways, so that hopefully not just here in this group, but also other people listening will feel that there are people that can tolerate being with them. Because if you feel understood, then you're not alone. And if you're not alone, then you can cope with things. You can find a way through anything. So I just wanted to respond a bit to say how great I felt your stories were fantastic, and they were painful, but they were also loving. and they were also stories of resilience. So, and I love that mix. So I just wanted to say thank you before we got onto the questions.
Thanks for interrupting. That was great. And I think I'd echo the same sentiment too.
Thank you again. But yeah, so to segue into the next discussion that we would really wanted to have was, I'll repeat. So, what has your experiences been with climate change, and when did you feel the climate crisis really hit home for you?
Go first.
You can go first, Dom, if you'd like.
Oh, well, I can just elaborate on what I was saying earlier. So I was having conversations with my dad very early on about the direction in which we are heading and feeling the weight of that very young. And yeah, as I previously said, I think that there was a little bit of compartmentalization happening, and in a way to sort of protect myself from really the deep sensitivity that I have. And when I actually allow myself to sit with the truth of what's coming, it's a very overwhelming, intense experience. And I'm sure everybody can relate to that. But I didn't have the tools to go through that effectively, as Caroline was saying. And I'm actually really curious, Caroline, as well, to understand a little bit more about how we went from that depression piece into the lovely, more positive slide, and understand sort of what that journey actually looks like, because I'm not 100% clear, and perhaps I missed something, so maybe we can go back to that in a little bit. But I didn't have the tools myself to deal with that, so I shut down, and then I went just kind of really focused on my performance career and felt this like guilt really that I wasn't really looking at what I can do, but it was like in sort of the back seat, because I was a dancer, and that was my complete passion, soul, just calling was in the performance arts, and went down that road. But it didn't feel right with having the knowledge of where we were heading and what was coming, to just ignore that. And so after a course of events, I ended up in a position of influence. And after taking a trip to India, and having just done a 10-day Vipassana meditation silent retreat for 10 days, I was able to hear some of the voices more clearly that needed to be heard and needed to come through, detangle a little bit of the stuff that was going on in my head. And actually then it led me to take action. And I started to really see the effects of climate change, and therefore decide to really step into understanding what I can do to try and make a difference, which then unfolded to where we are here having a discussion about eco anxiety. And it's ongoing. It really is. It's an ongoing thing, and it's only going to get more intense as we continue. So that's why these conversations are so important, and how much I appreciate Caroline's work, so that people are equipped for what's coming.
Thank you, Dom, for sharing that. Sarah, could you jump in and give us a little bit about Good Grief Network? I think the program that you all have would be very interesting to discuss a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, Sneha. And thanks, Dom, for sharing your story.
Thank you.
Yeah, so Good Grief Network is a nonprofit that creates spaces where people can gather in community and process the heavy feelings and emotions that come up when we face the realities of our time, and then use that collective processing to pivot individuals toward meaningful action in their lives. And as an organization, we're really committed to redefining what activism means. Activism does not need to mean boots on the ground in that very patriarchal, gung-ho, get in, get out kind of mentality. Activism could be in your life, for example, committing to more present parenting. You know, activism could be spending every single day with your own breath and understanding those voices that are speaking to you about the things you're afraid of. But what we think at Good Grief Network is we don't need a lot of people standing on the ground doing activism that doesn't feel authentic to them, the way that conventional activism has been defined. What we need is the whole, and we don't even need a portion of society doing that. What we need is every single person thinking for themselves where their skill set and their experience and their passions intersect so that we can be activists in every day of our lives. We need to figure out what lights us up so that we can do that every day. And I think that in my world has been the only antidote to the anxiety and the fear and the rage that I feel about our current state of the world. And I think that a lot of people who find Good Grief Network had a really isolating story of when the climate crisis hit home for them. And it looks a lot like my story. I'm the executive director of Good Grief Network now, but I first found Good Grief Network as a 10-step participant, in GGN's 10-step program. And this 10-step program is modeled off of the Alcoholics Anonymous 12-step model. So we have 10 steps that cycle people through accepting the severity of the predicament. That's step one. And we ask people then to, I can go through the steps at some future time, but we're asking people to really sink into the weight of what this predicament is, and then go through an underworld or inner world journey to the point where we can come out, look at our bias, look at the ways that our cultural narratives are constructing us to participate in systems of oppression, and then start to forgive ourselves so that when we pivot back toward our community, having done our inner work, we're ready to be activists in a way that feels meaningful and sustainable to us personally. And, the climate crisis, when it hit home for me, was so isolating. Every social circle I was in, I'm like, feel like I'm sounding the alarm, or I can't even say something without people being like, okay, Sarah, chill. We'll talk about climate crisis another time. This is just kind of like a wet blanket on this party. Like, no one wants to think about this right now. And what I felt for me personally was at every turn in my social life, someone was shutting down a conversation that felt like the absolute core of what I was living to talk about, And so it just felt so completely, I felt so estranged from my social circle. And I think what Good Grief Network offers people are small, intimate groups where that the other people in the group are thinking these things too, and those thoughts and the weight of them, and how scary it can be to really say how afraid we are, and how much that can make other people afraid because they might not be able to fix it for us. Like, that's what we're offering people at Good Grief, is a space where you can talk about these emotions, talk about what climate crisis means in your mind and in your body and in your life, without someone trying to fix you, without someone coming and giving you advice. And so I think that kind of communal setting and that invitation to re-explore activism, the invitation to start connecting with people that aren't afraid to hear about your fears or your anxiety or your mental health journey, I think those spaces are what create this camaraderie or this collective sense of action together. And I think that's kind of what Caroline said before about how she's seeing us all kind of cheer each other on just from hearing each other's stories. That sense of, I can call it sisterhood with us here, but that sense of personhood that we find when we're in community. I use this analogy a lot, and I'll stop after this, but I talk about an orchestra. Like, if you go see an orchestra play or you go to the symphony, there are notes that are held for minutes as part of this song. And to the audience, it sounds like the note is being held, but what's really happening is there are 10 musicians and some of them are playing and some of them are taking a breath. But because each person knows when it's their turn to play and when it's their turn to breathe, it seems like the note is sustained. And I think communities that can achieve that together, so the communities we have at Good Grief Network, we invite you to rest when you need to rest. You do not need to be an activist every second of your life. You don't even need to be awake to this crisis every second of your life, because we can't survive that way. By inviting people to rest and inviting people to play and alternating that, like we each get to trust that when we need to rest, our community members are going to hold the note for us, you know? And I think that without that kind of sense of a really strong social fabric where we're working together, it can be really easy to get lost in the depths of the emotions. It's just so helpful to feel like you're being uplifted by people around you. And so I think that's kind of how Good Grief really comes into supporting the mental health journey. Like we don't have some silver bullet, like if you actually do this every day, you'll feel better about climate crisis. No, that's not it. But we have a lot of tools where on any given day, if you try them, they might help you. And community is like absolutely one of them in our minds. Thanks.
No, thanks for sharing, Sarah, and everything that you're doing at Good Grief. The moment I heard about Good Grief, it blew my mind because the work you guys are doing is so important. So thanks for sharing that.
D2, Lerato, Randi, would you be open to talking about how the climate crisis kind of hit home for you?
Yeah, I can jump in. Not to spin the broken mom record, but I feel like so many moments, revolve around being a parent. But I remembered, I didn't even recall this memory until I was preparing for this panel. But I remember when I had returned to work after having Toby, and he was a few months old, and someone was reading an article, and it was about global warming. And it was one of those moments where you make a passing comment and you don't really realize who's around you. And they were just like, this is such a joke. Like, what kind of monster brings a child into this world? And I was just like, oof, like, why did I bring a child? Like, should I be worried about that? And then it was kind of like that, like guilt, that we talked about, Caroline put in her thing. And I was just like, should I have had a kid? Like, am I a monster? And then I started researching everything and kind of looking at what we could be doing and all that kind of stuff. And then from that, my motto then turned into like, well, screw you. I had a kid, so I can teach him how to change the world. And I can teach him to go and do better than we've done, or our parents did, or the people before us. That's why I had a kid. And like, I've literally brought him up the entire time with small lessons that I feel like at his age, he can like digest and understand and like, and it's gotten to the point. I mean, COVID's kind of put, like some of the things like, Mom, did we grab our bags when we go to the grocery store? Like, what are we buying bulk today? Like those things have kind of had to be put on hold because of that. But like, if you come home with a plastic bag, like, why did you have a plastic bag? Like he's in that mode of just that constant, like we were talking before the panel started, but my whiteboard full of information is an assignment for his class. And he came to me and said, I have to write this essay and I want to do it on people reducing plastic and not buying as much. And that was from him. Like, I didn't tell him what we should write about or anything, And so that's kind of where my journey started, was like that moment where I was like, no, like, I'm going to teach him to be better, and I'm going to teach him to work on the things that we can hopefully fix what we've done. And it's definitely gotten a lot more of a trajectory in the last few years. This amazing organization that I'm now blessed to be a part of, really kickstarted a lot of that. And I was lucky enough that, Toby loved Dom from Winona. And so I was like, hey, Dom said this, so maybe we should start doing it. And it was, parenting's a little bit of manipulation and coercion. So I, got to use that a few times, but it was just really easy to have that platform to just be like, oh, there's a new video out, let's watch it. And we'd watch it together. And then we talk about it like, oh, like, let's make sure we start thrifting more. And so it was easy to have those lessons. And even now being part of the organization, like we'll go through once a month, Dom and Randi probably don't know this, but I sit down with them once a month and we go through our social media posts and we have conversations about them and like why we're sharing what we're sharing and what we're doing, and how we're hoping to make a difference. And we're highlighting a new movie this week that Randi watched. And I told him like, we're gonna have to watch that this week, and, different things like that. And so parenting him and trying to teach him to be better has really helped hold me accountable and pushed me to do better as well. So.
Well, thanks for sharing, Mom of the Year. Oh, this is so inspiring.
Lerato, would you be open to talking now?
Okay, sure. I mean, for myself, I know that this may come as a shock, but it's something that is still very new. Um, we we're not necessarily having conversations about that because we are still struggling to even hold conversations, at our homes. You know, it's not even happening at schools. So I think that's why I'm also so excited to be part of this panel because of I know and I have an idea of what it is that the approach that other people from different parts of the world are taking towards, climate change and mental health and how they can actually, or how they intersecting. And I think that for me, that I don't have a lot to say, but there's actually a lot that I have taken. And one thing about me is that the Maya Angelou quote, if you learn, you teach, if you receive, you give. And that is what I am doing. I am taking away so that I can actually just, teach and give where I am coming from. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks for sharing that, Lerato, because that's also a big topic too, just the lack of resources and the lack of just advocacy, not only for just mental health, but mental health regarding climate change. So that is just a good perspective, even if this is new for you. So thanks for sharing that. Randi,
do you want to drive us home?
Sure. I feel like I'm being a bit repetitive because Jordan and Dom heard this the other day, but kind of the point that scared me about wanting to care about the environment more was when I read this book called The Politics of Pollution, and it explained that in laundry detergent, if it's not biodegradable, the chemicals in the detergent when going into the ocean causes like algae and whatnot to grow at such an exponential rate that it deprives fish of oxygen. And I was horrified when I learned about that. And that's when I switched to biodegradable products. And then I just started doing my research on the ways the things that we do impact the environment and how it contributes to climate change. And so, yeah, that was kind of my wake up moment of like, oh man, I've got to make a change personally. And this is the way to start.
thanks for sharing that, Randi. Dr. Caroline, we haven't asked you your experience too with just how it was processing the climate crisis, but you can also go into the process of transition that Dom was asking about as well, if you like.
Sure. I've got so many things crowding my mind that I want to say that I've got to pick the first one first. Well, I'll just share a little bit of my story. So I was an environmental activist, and I was a psychotherapist, and I thought these two parts of me were integrated. I thought, I'm one person. And this was 20 something years ago. And then I lived in Egypt for a couple of years, and I was underwater every day. And I was immersed in this other world on the coral reefs and the desert, and something about that shift in perspective. And I started to see the degradation. I started to see the damage of the world that I loved. And I started to see it and feel it. And it's a little bit like we've talked about here about the embodiment of these things and feeling it in our bodies and not just in our minds. And I think, going and living there and immersing myself in the water every day helped me to feel this at a different level. And I saw it at a different level, and it changed me. And I couldn't go back. I couldn't go back to perceiving and feeling environmentalism and climate change as something separate from other parts of my life after that. So they joined up in me somehow. And I felt the grief, and I found myself crying underwater because I was witnessing the destruction of a place that I loved. And I suddenly felt it differently, and that changed everything. So I came back to the UK and I thought, well, actually, I need to now immerse myself in joining up these parts of my world. So the psychotherapy joins with the climate change and the biodiversity crisis. So that's what that was happening over the last 20 years. So I wanted to share that story. I love everything everybody is saying here tonight, but particularly Sarah, you're just so articulate in communicating about the complexity of what we're dealing with and bringing it to a very, very human level. And I think all the stories here that everybody's sharing, I don't want to just call them stories, because I think the women here tonight are sharing their hearts and souls as well as their stories, is just really moving. And because these are stories of pain and struggle and resilience. And so I want to just comment a little bit about some of the questions that have come up. And if I don't do some of that now, I'll forget all of it. So I've got to just do a little bit and then I'll shut up. Because I think how do we build resilience, emotional resilience, psychological resilience? We do it through failure. We do it through getting things wrong. We do it through messing up and then getting back up and doing and trying again. And then you fail again. And then you get up and you try again. And then you fail again. And then you get up and you try again. So I think that's crucial in how we engage with psychology, mental health, and climate change, is that we will constantly be failing. And we constantly have to try and recover from that and get back up and learn, because this is new for us. This is unprecedented. So this is not a mapped psychological or ecological crisis. So we also have to have some humility about that. We need to learn how to navigate this. And if we can be open to that learning, then we will find a way to navigate. That doesn't mean we'll always get it right. So we have to be able to tolerate the good and the bad. So it's a both and solution that we're looking for. We mustn't split the success from the failure. We mustn't be looking for an either or solution to this. This is both and. Both we're going to succeed and we're going to fail sometimes. And there's a 10-year-old girl who I think perfectly described this. I have to use her name, Sophia. And she said, when I was talking to her about how do we talk about the climate crisis with children and not traumatize you? She said, well, she said, you've got to tell us the truth. She said, and if you don't tell us the truth, you're lying to us. She said, and if you're lying to us, then we can't trust you. She said, and if we can't trust you, we can't tell you how we feel. And if we can't tell you how we feel, then we're on our own with our bad feelings. I love this child. I wish she was running the world. She said, but don't tell us all the bad stuff all at once. Tell us the good stuff, then the bad stuff, then the good stuff, then the bad stuff. Right? She really should be running the world. She said, and anyway, she said, I'm not a baby, right? She's 10. So she has really perfectly talked, and this, Dawn, you were talking about this with your child as well, about this intergenerational conversation, about the need to be able to tolerate the good and the bad, the pain and the joy, the innovation and the inspiration, as well as the failure and the loss and the grief. And there was that really great question about how to move from that depression towards that kind of radical acceptance, the radical hope, the moving forwards, that integration. And it's very much that grief, that recognition that we've got something wrong that enables us to move forwards. So in psychotherapy, we talk about reparation and repair. We talk about rupture. We talk about the fact that once we recognize that we've failed, once we recognize that we get stuck, once humanity recognizes that we've really messed up when it comes to mental health generally and the climate and biodiversity crisis globally, once we recognize that we've got this badly wrong, then we have the opportunity to repair something. Then we have the opportunity to look for creative, innovative solutions. Somebody said, I don't want to be fixed. Well, we're not broken machines. We don't need to be fixed. We just need to be understood. And then we can develop meaning. So it's that grief of recognizing that we've got something badly wrong, which will enable us to move forward and start to rebuild and repair something differently. It's like we've got to break down the old. We've talked here about the systemic injustice, the systemic colonial racism. We've talked about that breakdown. Those are the systems that need to be broken down. And then we have the possibility of creating something new out of this. And it's like the caterpillar. The metaphor I use is the caterpillar goes into the cocoon, and the caterpillar in the cocoon, I always used to think that a caterpillar would go into the cocoon and grow legs and wings and turn into a butterfly that way. And it absolutely blew my mind when I found out what happened in the cocoon is the caterpillar actually dissolves and breaks down into a soup. And so you've got this liquid in the cocoon, and this is a metaphor for what we need to do psychologically and ecologically, and in terms of our community and these systems. We need to break it down. But the components of these systems, the components of the caterpillar, then reform themselves into a whole new creature. So this is transformational change. And then it emerges as a butterfly. So we can take all of these damaged, broken, bruised, hurt, wounded parts of ourselves and reorganize them, resystemize them, reshape them. And then we have the transformational change that's possible. And then we can do that and recover and heal from the shame and the guilt and the grief and the pain and the loss. We do need to say sorry. We do need to say sorry to the children. We need to say sorry to Black and minority ethnic people, to Indigenous people, and we need to say sorry to the animals that we have failed. And then we need to get together and fix it.
This is amazing.
Thank you, Caroline.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Can I jump in really quick?
Yeah, go for it.
That butterfly analogy we use at Good Grief all the time, and I absolutely love it. And what we think about a lot is that if you found our 10-step program at Good Grief, you're in the goo. You're in the period of the chrysalis where everything is falling apart and you don't know where the wings are yet. And we're looking for them. We're like, I know it's in this goo somewhere. I know this dissolved mess has my wings that are going to allow me to take flight in the next paradigm that we create. And so at Good Grief in our staff meetings, we stopped asking, how are you? And started asking, how's the goo? And so we ask, how's the goo?
I call it soup. I call it caterpillar soup. So yeah, it's like, but the other beautiful thing about that metaphor is the butterfly then has to fight to get out of the cocoon. I'm sure you know this. And there is a struggle. There is an incredible struggle to do that. So we have to dig deep, and we have to find psychological, emotional, mental, community resources that we sometimes might feel that we haven't got. And that's okay, because that struggle is what enables those wings to open up. So the struggle, we want to just turn this around on its head and say the struggle is great. But we need less of a heroic, masculine, doesn't have to be a gendered personification, but there's this heroic story of we're going to beat this. We're going to beat climate change. We're going to beat COVID. We're going to dominate nature. And this is underpinning misogyny, and it's underpinning the Western medical model, which says that if you've got a mental health problem, then there's something wrong with you and you need to be fixed. And it's that underpinning misogyny and patriarchy and Western medical model that is causing the damage to women and girls and the planet and animals. So we need a more feminine, lunar, reflective, loving model, which is more of the soul. So we need to go down to grow, not up.
I don't know. I always feel like now that you described the butterfly, the caterpillar experience, I would definitely feel like I'm in the goo and I have no way of getting out. And I think I feel like, I don't know if everyone else was like that too, but I definitely feel in the goo more often than I don't. And it leads really well into our next question. How has everyone else been like coping with getting out of their goo and like their own mental health struggles around eco-anxiety or just anxiety in general, just to kind of give any of our listeners and also us here ideas of ways to just kind of manage this. And like Dr. Caroline said, like find that radical hope within ourselves to make it up that slope. Because I feel like a lot of us feel like we're definitely at the bottom of that slope with no way of getting up. So if anyone would love to share what they've found helps, totally go for it.
I can go. It's not necessarily like around like the, mental health with the climate crisis, but just kind of mental health in general. But I actually had this happen yesterday, and so it's like fresh in my mind. But going to therapy has taught me, and I wish people knew this, like it teaches you a lot about yourself, and things you don't know and things you can't recognize. And it's like getting a new mirror on your wall, and seeing these different layers of yourself that you couldn't see in the mirror you had before. And so I've learned a lot about like my ego, and I've learned a lot about kind of like getting into my feelings, and where like I don't really know what triggers it. But I know now how to recognize when I'm just like in my feelings, and like what I'm thinking in my head isn't real. It's not there for any specific reason. Like it's just shit I'm making up, And then when I'm in that, I realize that I waste a whole bunch of my day just sitting in my feelings and wallowing, and just not having a good time. And so I've found ways to easier like recognize that. And my solution is that when I recognize it, I immediately get up and I get a piece of paper and I write 10 things that I'm thankful for and I'm grateful for. And it pulls me out of that muck, and it like reminds me of the good things that I have, because all I'm thinking about are the bad made up things in my head. And so that's what I've been doing when I notice kind of slipping into that like bad headspace. So
thanks for sharing that, D2. That's a really good idea. I know when I was a student at the University of Toronto, I had two of my friends actually started a happy book, and they put these little books with a pen around our student spaces that just said, write 3 things that made you happy today. And people would just go around, and sometimes they would go around and handing it to people. And it was really nice watching people be like, nothing made me happy today. And when you ask them, like, really think about it, people then took a second to really be appreciative of some of the things that often get so overlooked. We tend to dwell so much in the negatives and the things that go wrong and completely overlook those positives. But yeah, that gratitude book, happy books, great idea.
I can add a little something. For me, creativity has been very important for me during this time, especially in regards to, like, I write music, and there was a time quite a few months ago now where we were really deep into some big work, like anti-racism work, and also I was like diving deeper into climate issues, and just feeling at the moment like there is so much, like we are really unlearning everything that we've been taught in our lifetime, it feels like. And I clearly at times find it quite overwhelming, and I got my guitar and I wrote a song about that, and it was really helpful. And so I would say that creativity as a tool for healing is very powerful, and whether it be that you are an artist, a painter, or a poet, or a songwriter, or a chef, or whatever your creative outlet is, I think we shouldn't underestimate the power of creativity to help us understand our experience and our feelings, especially when it is heightened because of everything that's going on in the world right now. Thank you.
Oh, thanks for sharing that. I totally agree. People underestimate how much art has a real power and influence over people.
I'll jump in if that's okay. Cool. So for me, I mean, therapy has been the biggest help. But apart from that, obviously, I think Don said that therapy will teach you so many things about yourself, and it also, I always say that you do not have to actually be in a bad space to actually go for therapy, because you're constantly learning something and you are getting these amazing tools that, well, I know personally that I wouldn't have learned or gotten from home, or anywhere else in the community. And I think that's why I always say that everybody's got a role to play in the community, never disregard anyone. And for me, that's how I explain it to my circle of friends or family, that there's a reason why we have, your doctors. I mean, if you had a headache for a week and it's not going away, you would go and see, a general practitioner. However, if you are just not in a good mental state, it's so difficult for you to even, where do I go? Where do I start? And for me, apart from therapy, journaling has been the biggest help. So journaling has become a part of my life every single day. So reflecting for me it allows me to reflect. It's like the biggest thing for me. I wake up and I'm actually like, how is my heart? Instead of asking, how are you doing? So I do it with my mother now, like, how is your heart? And she's actually doing those, the same thing to me now, like, hey, she's be calling me and how's your heart? And, when somebody actually asks, like, how's your heart? You start to actually like dig deeper, like, actually, how is it? How am I doing? Because, when you're asking how you're doing, we're so used to automatically just, divert to, yeah, I'm okay type of thing, And so journaling has also been like a really big part of my life in the morning and in the evening. So I reflect, it also allows me to set the tone for my day, so that's been very helpful. Obviously, treatment, taking my medication, that has also been very important. Also, rest is such a big thing. I mean, I give off so much of myself. And the other day, my little brother said, I was like, oh, I'm not feeling great. And he said, have you actually thought of just like doing nothing? Do nothing and just let people pour into you and just take and not give anything. And I thought that really sounds selfish. It's such a big oopsie for me to be like, oh my gosh, I want to be taking from other people, because it's always been such a glorified thing to give and give and give, but we don't realize that it's also important to just pause and do absolutely nothing. I mean, I realized that I had not done any reading for pleasure in the past 2 years, up until we were like in COVID. And it's the small things like that that really help me, and obviously not obviously, but I was also introduced to a gratitude journal, which is very, very helpful. So I really can attest to that it's been very helpful for me. But rest is also very big. Very, very big. I know people preach, pour into your own cup, but every now and then I get people reminding me that you sound like you're actually giving off from an empty place, and people can sense that. If I am going to do work that I'm passionate about, I want to pour from a place of fullness and not emptiness. And I've had to learn the hard way that, it's okay. It's okay to just take a break, and also asking for help. That's another thing that I've had to learn last year. It's such a big thing. It's like, I mean, with my ego, I'm just like, no, I'm going to do this by myself. And I realized that it doesn't work. It's never worked for the past, 29 years. And look, I am now just that person. Like, look, I actually need the help. If I feel like I can't do the dishes, I will ask somebody in the house, as small as it sounds. But I mean, there are days when I just can't even do anything. And I'm like, yeah, no. So asking for help is also a very, very big thing for me now. Cool.
Well, thanks for sharing that, Lerato. I totally agree. Those are amazing suggestions. Sarah, go for it.
Can I jump in with that? Lerato, you just helped me realize something about my own practice that I don't think I realized before now, which is that asking for my community to be around me is one of my main coping tools. And again, as someone who's an older sister and has been maybe conditioned within my family system to believe that I'm the helper, I think that that's one of the biggest things, is just reaching out to community and saying, I'd love to have a phone call this week. And sometimes that does feel like a burden, like you're asking someone else to hold space for you. And that helps me realize something else, which is I went to it's called the Decolonizing Unconference. And I went last week for a piece on decolonizing our relationships. And the two speakers said that consent is essentially the antithesis to white supremacy. Consent is the opposite of decolonization, consent is the opposite of colonization. When we ask each other how we're feeling, when we make sure that there's space to enter, that's the opposite of how we've been colonized by patriarchy and white supremacy. And this person asked, when was the last time you were in consent with yourself? How often do you really need to rest, but you push through for another hour of work? How often is your body hungry, but you wait 20 minutes to eat? And how can we have relationships with each other where we're all honoring where each other are at in that very moment, recognizing that the climate crises and all these intersecting crises are running through us in different levels at different times? How do we check in with our communities and both ask for what we want and offer to, and say, I'm ready to receive it, right? Because sometimes we ask and we're actually not ready to receive. And that just really helped me remember that that's an essential piece of my emotional regulation, is making sure that when I ask for something, I am ready to receive, and making sure that when someone asks me for love, I'm ready to give because my cup is full. So thanks for pointing that out to me. And just the one other thing I wanted to share that's been really helpful with me. When I used to live near the ocean, I used to call it the Saltwater Trifecta. And so I would sweat, cry, and swim every day. And I'd get my salt water in 3 ways, but I don't live near the ocean anymore. So I try to get like my face wet, even just that kind of like that shock into my body. And I try to cry and sweat every day. And the way that I sweat is usually with a really big dance. I listen to some really intense music, maybe from when I was angsty as a teenager, and I just dance until I'm drenched in sweat. And there's something so freeing about it, because you're kind of welcoming in joy, but pushing out the intensity of the feelings. So those are my practices. Thank you.
What's a song you would dance to? What was an angsty song that you liked?
There's a band called No Doubt that was very popular when I was a young woman, and the song I'm Just a Girl, woo, that one really gets me.
It's a good song. Love it.
Sarah, the access to nature, that's how I get through it all, is getting outside in ways that we haven't been able to in the past, and being out for extended periods of time and like we've been able to in the past. So I'm taking this opportunity to access nature and to reestablish that connection with the environment and remind myself of why I'm doing the work that I'm doing. Yeah, that's what I'm doing.
Love that. Thanks, Randi.
Yeah, I wanted to say something similar. So I don't think of myself as working in a dyad in psychotherapy anymore. It's not just me with one person. I work with the triad, with the planet, with the earth, with the environment. So as a form of eco-psychology or eco-psychotherapy or climate psychology. So I try to ask the planet to help me now. So if I'm exhausted, I'll go and lean against a tree and just say, help me. You know, I'll try and help you, you try and help me. And I bribe the birds to come into my garden a lot. I put a lot of worms out for the birds, mealyworms, dried worms. And I just stand there and I watch them all move around. And in that moment, I can just lose myself in sort of them. And I feel part of that. I feel part of their world. So absolutely, the way nature, we can be with nature. And the other thing I just wanted to say is also to reframe anything that feels like it's suffering as you're only feeling this disconnect or this dysregulation or this pain or this suffering because you care. This is the price we pay for caring. So actually be proud and celebrate and don't suffer alone. But, you know, be kind to take the edge off the suffering so it's not unbearable. But don't try and get rid of it, because it's the suffering that will connect us to the suffering of the planet and the suffering of other people. So I want to feel this discomfort.
Dr. Hickman, I just need to add that it's my motto in life to think about things in the way of what's going to make me less miserable, doing something or not doing something, and it's always doing something, because you know it's that's how we get somewhere.
Sure, absolutely. But a lot of what we've talked about this evening is the importance of the internal activism as well as the external activism. I mean, that's been there for everyone. That internal activism could be just sitting quietly, but that's still activism. That's doing, right? And that's that balance between being and doing, isn't it? So and I loved that idea of doing nothing. That doing nothing purposefully and mindfully and honoring our need to do nothing is very healing. That was great. I love that. So
Thank you, Dr. Caroline. We've already kept you all for so long, and we don't want to interrupt your day anymore. Lerato, you actually gave us the perfect question to end on, actually. So we'd love to just know, how is everyone's heart feeling now after having this wonderful discussion?
Well, I just want to live with you all forever, right? I just don't want to go. I want to stay here with you, because for me, this has just been such an honor and such a pleasure. So thank you.
So I've been sitting here and I'm like, shoo, it's like past midnight now, but I'm like, okay, I can still go on for some time. I mean, I don't mind. But yeah, no, it's been really amazing. And I don't know, my heart is, you know, when you're just so content and so happy, like, wow, you guys are so amazing. And I have learned so much. And for me, I'm all about just immersing myself in the experience and the moment. And I've just given every bit of myself to this. And I think I'm at ease. I'm happy. It's been really, really amazing. I appreciate all of you. And I'm just like, can this not be the last time I see these amazing ladies? Please. Yeah, but thank you. Thank you so much.
My heart is very full, and I'm very, very fortunate that I was asked by you two, because I've learned a lot, and connecting with everyone has been just such a joy, and hearing everyone's perspectives, and it's helped me like reevaluate this panel. It's helped me reevaluate things about myself. So I'm going to take what I've learned and grow. Thank you. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I definitely mirror Randi. I was actually nervous about this panel. I usually don't get nervous about these things, but I was nervous about this one. I was texting Randi earlier and I was like, I can't calm down. I think it was just because like this is a vulnerable topic and you just don't know. I kind of winged it too. I looked at the questions when you first sent them and then I didn't look at them again. And I thought I wanted to just come in authentic and not, you know, do too much prep and just speak from the heart. And yeah, this was an amazing experience and a good reminder that doing things that scare you is important. So thank you for the invite.
Thank you for all.
Thank you for accepting.
Yeah, I know.
I can follow that because I can echo those feelings. My heart was also a little agitated before I got here a little jumpy, and I feel very settled and uplifted right now by this conversation. And I just want to take a moment to thank Jordan and Sneha for organizing and bringing us together so that we had the opportunity to meet, and thank our amazing interpreter, Shelley, for making this more accessible to everyone. Thank you.
Is it me? I guess it's me now. Yeah, agreed. Absolutely agree. My heart is feeling quite a few different things, honestly. There, I'm feeling hope. It's so exciting to be in this discussion, and I thank Jordan, Sneha, for organizing this. The work that you're doing is unbelievable. It's so important, and I know that this conversation is going to help a hell of a lot of people. So yeah, congratulations. And to everybody else that joined today, it was so brilliant hearing your points of view and your perspectives. I have learned so much. Sarah, I have lots of food for thought. I've been really feeling into the importance of healing in activist spaces and changing the way that we're thinking about activism. So I'm feeling inspired in that sense, and we'll definitely continue processing the things that we've shared and spoken about in this panel. So yeah, thank you so much to everyone. And yeah, over to you. Am I the last one, or was it Randi? I think maybe. Oh, you've already spoken, my love. My apologies.
Well, Shelley, if you also want to.
There's a comment in the chat that we want Jordan, Sneha, and Shelley to also share from their hearts.
Shelley, you can go first if you would like. We'd love to know how your heart's doing.
Well, someone took the words out of my mouth that my heart is full. I'm just full, and I'm so impressed with all of you here. You know, I can't wait to share some of the things I've learned with my family members who do, you know, especially my grandson who suffers with, mental health issues. So I can't wait to share some of the techniques that I've learned here on this job interpreting to share with him. But thank you all for sharing, and I hope I can join you all the next time because it was really very inspirational.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here, Shelley.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Sneha, how's your heart?
I've been thinking about that since Lerato mentioned it, but to be honest, everyone's echoed a very similar feeling. It's full, and honestly, it's hopeful, which I don't say very often. But this conversation, I've mentioned this before. Whenever we have these kind of intense conversations, sometimes there's a little bit of a heaviness that carries over to the rest of my day. But the energy, the honesty, just felt so positive. And yeah, it's honest, it is hard conversations, but when we have these conversations, it's why it gets more comfortable eventually. So I'm just grateful that everyone took that sort of invite about coming and having these open conversations. So I'm just I feel hopeful. That's the word I can use, I guess. Jordan, you?
Yeah, it's funny. Sneha and I were talking. I definitely felt we were not the two best people to even co-host this, and I definitely had a lot of anxiety coming in about if we were the best people to be leading a conversation like this. But it definitely made me feel like, because Imperfect Eco-Hero started because I felt very imperfect, and I still do. I always joke that I'm the imperfect and imperfect eco-hero because my co-host is so incredible, and the work they're doing is impressive, and I don't feel like I've done even a fraction of it. But it's really wonderful to hear that those same feelings are echoed just across the globe, and people who are doing incredible things. You guys are all eco-heroes, so it was reassuring to hear that you guys all feel the same way, and that we're all kind of in this together. Hopeful is, I think, the best word, and my heart definitely feels full, beating fast, but full for sure. But yeah, no, I'm just really appreciative for this conversation. Yeah.
Before we let everyone go, I think I speak for Jordan and I both. We just want to take a moment to express our gratitude, not just for taking time out of your schedules to be a part of this panel, but also taking effort to make positive change in this world. It's nothing short of inspiring and it brings us so much hope. And we know that same passion would have translated to those that see this discussion. And especially in turbulent times like now, it's often easy to succumb to such a pessimistic approach to life and lose hope. But especially in those moments, focusing on individuals that take steps towards making positive change in whatever magnitude has helped me, and I know even Jordan as well, to ground ourselves. And every single one of you here are one of those individuals that we feel inspired by and that why we feel hopeful. So thank you so much for the work you do. We hold so much respect and gratitude for you all, and we're grateful to have been able to share this space with everyone here today. And Shelley, thank you for joining us today and helping us. It's thank you. That's all I can say.
So just so everyone at home listening, we're going to put all of your links down below in the video description, any resources, everything you would need to know is below. So the only thing I can say is echo thank you, and to everyone listening, thanks for listening. You definitely took the right step. Hopefully you made it this whole way through, and just know you're not alone. We're all feeling the same way and we're all rooting for each other. Yeah, thank you.